What's up, folks? I'm Arran Topalian, and welcome back to another episode of Game Design Live. For any newcomers, GDL offers you live, interactive design deconstructions of a video game as it's played by a game designer, where we check out new games together every week and call out and chat about any cool or interesting design choices along the way. So if you're into game design in general, or into a certain game and just want to understand it better on a design level, this is the place to be. And tonight, I'm very excited to be sharing Halo Infinite with you. I don't know if you've been playing it yourself. I've been playing a ton of it, partly for my own selfish reasons of just wanting to have good old-fashioned fun, but also to prepare for tonight to kind of walk you through some of the different bits and pieces we're going to be talking through. So this is going to be a deep dive episode. For those of you who are familiar with the channel, we tend to do two different types of episodes on GDL. One is a spotlight series where we play something new for the first time and discuss its design together, and then we have deep dives where we go into specific areas of a certain game and ask questions of it, namely around why is something designed a certain way, and attempt to sort of analyze and deconstruct why certain decisions have been made. So for this episode, we're going to be looking obviously at Halo Infinite, and three main areas in particular. We're going to be looking at the weapon and combat design. We're going to be looking at the game feel, and we're also going to be chatting a little bit about the meta design, which, if you're sort of stay tuned into kind of gaming industry news, has definitely been making the rounds. So it's going to be interesting to chat about a little bit. Also, I have got my live chat here in front of me. So if you have anything you want to shout out, or questions you want to ask, or things you want to say, or suggestions you want to make, please do, and I will respond as soon as I possibly can, while I'm switching between looking at one screen for notes and the other screen trying not to die. So let's just start playing. This music as well. Like the first time I launched this game and heard this music on the front screen, it was a moment. So for now, we're not going to touch on anything here, like in terms of UI and stuff like that. If we've got time at the end, what I'll probably do is just touch on some general bits and pieces and observations. Let's just get playing. In fact, maybe we should do a quick run through just in case you're not familiar with how this all is set up. So yeah, this is the multiplayer screen, the lobby screen, or what you call the lobby screen of Halo Infinite. You've got a couple of different options here. You've got their live event, which is at the top, quick play, bot bootcamp, does what it says on the tin, big team battle, which is sort of their bigger version of quick play. Essentially, you have no kind of say over what game modes you play. You just sort of pick what size of game you want to play in, and in turn, how many players and how big the map. You've got your Spartan on the right, and then here, if you press Y, or depending on what platform you're on, you get access to the Battle Pass. And there's three things up here at the moment. We've got the Battle Pass itself, the challenges, which we're going to talk about more later, and the event Battle Pass. So live events, when they run, essentially have their own Battle Pass, which in this case is being everything included in it is being offered for free. You'll also notice this kind of week 1, week 2, week 3 business in the top left corner. We're going to talk a bit more about that later in the episode. So that's the general setup of the screen, which again, we're not going to talk about in any great detail right now. We're just going to get playing. Here you've got the game lists. You can see what different game modes and maps this playlist supports, and boosts, which we're not going to talk about yet either, because we're going to be talking about the guns and weapon design and combat design of the game as soon as possible. I'm level 12 now, the Battle Pass. Don't know how I managed that, because we all know I am not good at video games. Just sheer determination. As a heads up as well, we're not going to be talking about the balancing of Halo Infinite's weapons, which is a far more subjective subject, I would say, and a totally different can of worms to open, although I will say that, in my opinion at least, there are definitely some tweaks to be had in terms of how many shots it takes certain weapons to kill opponents with. But anyway, like I say, we're not going to touch on that, and instead we're going to talk a bit about each gun's function and performance at a high level. So while we're waiting for the game to load, let's just get cracking and start talking about that. So imagine, from obviously Halo Infinite, all the games in Halo right across the entire series have featured very distinct weapons, I guess what you'd call orthogonally differentiated weaponry, which is a term that we've spoken about in previous episodes, and if you haven't seen those episodes, you can check all the previous episodes of GDL out on the YouTube channel, which you can access from the Twitch page in the About section. But we've talked about this term before, and what it essentially means is that each weapon is highly distinct. It's not just gun A1, gun A2, gun A3, are just the same gun but different versions of itself or more powerful versions of itself. Each gun functions very differently and in turn has very distinct advantages and disadvantages. I'm just going to go ahead and say they're not going to hear me, but I'm going to apologize to all these players up front for spoiling their game, because this is probably going to be a wash, because it's very difficult to talk and play at the same time. So yeah, imagine each weapon in Halo having 4 high-level stats. So those stats would be something like ammo, skill requirement, oh that's not going to go well, skill requirement, range, and damage. So these high-level stats. And now imagine scoring each weapon on each of those stats out of 5. It's unlikely that any one weapon will score higher, will score particularly high in more than 2 of those stats, of the 4 stats we talked about, which again were ammo, skill requirement, range, and damage. So for example, the shotgun is fairly easy to use, ease of use, skill requirement being one of those stats, compared to the sniper rifle, for example, and does very high damage, but is a short-range weapon, which usually comes with quite scarce supplies of ammo. Whereas something like the sniper is very high damage and range, so those two sort of like 2 of those 4 stat fields are quite high, but they're it's much harder to use the sniper rifle effectively, and is also typically quite ammo light compared to the deeper clips of something like the assault rifle, which is this thing we're using here. So this is a very intentional choice that results in most of the weapons in Halo Infinite feeling useful and having a purpose that's easy enough for players to identify, understand, and learn more about over time, which sits right alongside the core mastery of simply getting better at the game and improving your improving your aim. And this kind of harkens back to things we talked about before in previous episodes, which is that game design oftentimes is a bit like kind of coming up with a magic trick that you kind of want your audience to figure out how it's done to a certain degree, and then feel good about themselves for doing that. They're kind of figuring out what the solution is. And that tends to be the kind of the journey that that players go on. So you're kind of trying to make it clear enough to kind of generally understand what those different advantages and weaknesses are of each weapon, without making it so obvious that it's kind of boring, and also kind of leaving a lot of room for opportunity and learning about different ways that those weapons can be useful in different situations. Like each weapon is essentially an answer to a problem. I'm just going to do it. Nope. Each weapon is, essentially an answer to a problem or several dozen problems, and it's up to the player to sort of identify over time when and how to use the right tool for the job, which in turn makes the player feel smart / good about themselves. So for example, if there's a problematic vehicle on the battlefield, you'll eventually learn over time to go and find an energy weapon. Or if it's a close quarters fight, you'll probably go for a sword or a shotgun. And if you're familiar with first-person shooters, these are sort of archetypes of weapon that it's easy enough to identify that those are the kind of things that you want. And the level design of Halo Infinite as well really reinforces that learning curve, which we're going to touch on a little bit later on in a bit more detail. So what's particularly interesting are the several weapons in Halo Infinite that are new to the series that offer certain weapon archetypes more variety, while still ensuring that each has their own distinct pros and cons. Where are you? Didn't go well. For example, we've now got the new rocket launcher / sniper rifle called the Skewer, and if and when I come across it, I'll point it out. It's essentially a large rocket launcher looking ballista that fires a singular high-velocity spike. Is essentially how it works. So it boasts the firepower of a sniper rifle and is also anti-vehicle, and also the projectile is... Ooh, wow. No. Oh, so close. It's also anti-vehicle, and its projectile travels slower. The projectile itself that it fires travels slower than a bullet, but faster than a rocket, and doesn't do AoE. So there's some very clear pros and cons to this new addition to the heavy weaponry catalog that they offer. But what's just as important is the skewer's visual design. And again, if and when we get to use it, I'll make sure to point it out. But its visual design, it looks like a rocket launcher, and I think it's a very intentional choice, as it offers players sort of more opportunities to experience that moment of finding and holding and using this big, powerful-looking weapon. So it's a smart choice, I think, on Halo Infinite's part to sort of expand on those super powerful, not just super powerful in a functional sense, but also in a visual sense, super powerful weapons. Hang on, let's see if we can get this down. Yeah. That is going to happen often throughout this episode, is me like disconnecting from the chat for just a second while I play. So yeah. So why does Halo only allow for 2 guns to be held at any one time is the next question I want to cover, which is part more of their combat design. Oh. It's not going to end well. No. Yeah, so why does Halo only offer 2 guns to be held at any one time? Which has always been the case throughout the entirety of the series. So a big part of Halo's formula is being able to hold this maximum of 2 firearms. So you can see here in the bottom right that I'm switching between 2 firearms, which in this case are the pistol and the assault rifle. That's a problem. Oh yeah, that's really a problem. Yeah. So yeah, we're holding 2 firearms, and you're only ever allowed to hold a maximum of 2 firearms in Halo at any given time, which you can switch between. So the question is, why did Halo ever introduce this restriction in the first place to players? You know, in shooters before Halo, like Doom for example, the player could find and switch between every weapon the game had to offer. And to my mind, there are a few key reasons for its inclusion, which has remained the same throughout the entire series. So it first and foremost provides players with a meaningful decision-making outside of core combat. So whenever you're not in a fight in Halo, you're probably doing one of 2 things. One is that, which is looking for and finding a fight and engaging in a fight. The other one is running across the map, finding different weaponry, whether it's because you're actually looking for a certain weapon or because you're just finding weaponry as you play on the ground, whether because it's being spawned there or because it's being dropped by an enemy. Either way, because you can only hold 2 weapons at any given time, each time you come across another weapon in the map, it's another opportunity for the game to give the player a meaningful decision, which is a big part of any game experience and is something we've talked about in previous episodes. And as Sid Meier once put it, a game is ultimately a series of interesting choices. So it adds more decision making to an otherwise fairly decision light game. Whereas obviously if you could find and pick up all the weapons imaginable, then that decision making juncture is lost pretty much. Oh no. That was mostly luck. That was all luck. Oh, damn it. So yeah, each time the player finds that weapon, they have to decide if they want to pick it up. Not only if they want to pick it up, but if they do want to pick it up, which weapon they want to exchange it for. And that kind of decision-making is also based on a myriad of other things, such as personal preference, or weapon rarity, or the needs of the combat situation. The list goes on. Secondly, it encourages use of something called the Golden Triangle, which this game actually calls out a couple of times in the tooltips that it offers. Oh gosh. That was not too bad. Wow, for someone who's been looking at the screen like half the time, we're actually not doing too badly. Yeah, so the Golden Triangle, or the Golden 3 Things of Halo, was described by Lars Bakken, I think is the way you pronounce the name, who was a multiplayer designer on Halo 3, specifically around weapons. Specifically the Golden Triangle relates to the 3 sort of key aspects of Halo's combat, which are weapons, grenades, and melee. And obviously, as you can imagine, if players could hold more than 2 weapons at any given time, melee and grenades would likely become far less prevalent, which in turn would impact the variety of individual combat exchanges. Just get up here before I start talking again. And thirdly, I would say that it really helps ensure... Oh god. Yes. And thirdly, it really helps ensure that no one player can ever be all-powerful, and places a much greater onus on skill versus just pure firepower. Like, no one player can ever become a sort of Swiss Army knife. there's always a weakness, and it also in turn encourages teamwork. The strongest weapon you have is your team, because between the four of you have more firepower, but also more versatility. So we're going to move straight on, because we're already like 17 minutes in. Wow, that's quick. We're going to move on to another aspect of Halo Infinite's combat experience and weapon/equipment design, which is exactly that. Why add equipment back into the game, and why the types of equipment versus what Halo had before. So equipment are, just to kind of give a sense of what equipment is, right after I die horribly. I don't even want to look at the leaderboard. Oh, that's sad. Let's see if we can find a piece of equipment. So equipment are essentially, you can see there in the bottom right corner, under B, the little silhouetted B input command prompt, is an empty field. That's where equipment goes. And equipment is much like weaponry in the sense that you can find it throughout the game, throughout a match. And there's different types of equipment, and they usually come, they stack. So, you know, if you find equipment item A, you'll get 3 uses of that, or 3 or 4 or 5 uses of that item, and then eventually when you've used it all up, it expires and you don't have it anymore. So it's much like a weapon in terms of ammo. And they're found, as I say, in the map. And there's different types as well. In Halo Infinite, there's things like the grapple hook, the repulsor, I can't remember what it's called, but it's kind of like a dodge piece of equipment that allows you to sort of like dash in a certain direction, in any direction you choose when you press the button. Where's that player? Nice. Well played. So yeah, in Halo 5, equipment was removed from the game, which had existed in Halo 3 and 4, and replaced with something called Spartan abilities, which were inherent abilities that all players were given to play with, and would start each and every match with. They were just sort of built into the player's core ability set, and that included things like a built-in thruster pack and ground pounding. And these were things, like I said, that every player had access to, meaning that in theory, all players were always on an even playing field in terms of capabilities, which in theory sounds okay. So why add it back in and remove Spartan abilities this time around, which is a very conscious decision, right? It's a very clear decision that they've made. So equipment does a couple of cool and interesting things. It offers more things to find on the map. Like, it's one extra thing that you can riddle your map designs with. Like, it's not just weapons that you're on the hunt for, you're also looking for cool bits of equipment, which in and of itself offers the game what you'd call more combat magnets. So these are sort of positions around the battlefield where you're likely to find fights and get into fights and meet players more often, because there are things that multiple players want to have. And they also create a greater degree of variety being a super important aspect of lifestyle games in particular, from match to match, because the types of equipment that show up vary from map to map and from match to match. And also, they offer Halo Infinite, and here it comes, I'm only going to do it once, I promise. It offers Halo Infinite an infinitely greater degree, I'm sorry, I apologize straight away, but it does offer a much greater degree of depth in terms of both expressive play and what's referred to as emergent gameplay, through the use of what Game Maker's Toolkit's Mark Brown refers to as versatile verbs. So Mark Brown, we're just going to jump straight into another game while we talk. So Mark Brown defines versatile verbs as one action that can have multiple uses depending on how you perform it. So, and this is where really kind of Halo Infinite's equipment shines in a way that previous equipment did not. And if I come across it, actually, let's see if we can, let's do one of these game modes, because I know these start... Oh, I've already gone to a different game. Okay, do it next. So yeah, there's different pieces of equipment, like I say, like the repulsor, for example. I think it's called the repulsor. And the way it works, if we find one, we can showcase it in action. The way the repulsor works is that when you press the button to make it happen, your Spartan sort of lifts their arm up, and for like a 1 second or 1.5 second moment, kind of this burst of energy emanates from their forearm. Kinetic energy. And what's particularly interesting about this, the first thing you probably try doing with it is using it on players, and if and when you do use it on players, if it hits them into walls, that does damage. So it's, you know, as an offensive tool, it's quite good for kind of like, you know, batting away sword users or shotgun users or whatever else. But what's really interesting is the versatility of it. It doesn't just work on players, it works on anything that you would expect it to work on. So if there's a grenade that's coming towards you, you can repulse that right back. If there's a vehicle coming towards you, you can repulse that right back. You can use it to kind of knock players off of ledges and whatnot. So this is what we mean by when we talk about versatile verbs. The same thing applies to other pieces of equipment, like the grapple hook, for example, which can definitely be used to navigate the environment, and it's probably the first kind of thing that players will try to do. But again, it can also be used to latch onto vehicles and hijack them from a distance. It can be used to grab equipment and weaponry from a distance. Oh, damn! Wow. From a distance. And this versatility is what's particularly interesting about the equipment they've added back in the variety and unusual and unexpected moments that like I say, create the degree of variety that Halo Infinite offers. Let's see. And what's also interesting is noting the equipment that 343 has clearly intentionally omitted or changed since equipment was last in Halo, namely the bubble shield and armor locking, or what I think was called armor locking. Damn it. So yeah, armor locking is gone entirely, whereas the bubble shield has been swapped out for something called the drop wall, which is essentially a piece of equipment that you deploy, and when you throw it on the ground, it creates this sort of, you know, X meters high piece of like holographic wall in front of you that protects you from incoming fire. But if and when it takes damage, these different segments that it's composed of break away and create openings for people to shoot through. It's also not completely encompassing, so you know, you can flank it, you can throw grenades over it and get grenades behind it, and that's what's most interesting about the difference between something like the bubble shield versus the drop wall, is both of those items, those being the bubble shield, and there we are, there's the drop wall right there, you see. So you see here that you fire at it and the different sort of segments get weaker. And what's interesting about its design versus things like the bubble shield is that both the bubble shield and armor locking had one thing in common, or at least one thing in common, besides, you know, their inherent level of power, which is that they demand what you'd call singular solutions. So the only option to counter a bubble shield was to... Oh, boy. That didn't go well, Tom. The only option to counter a bubble shield was to walk inside the bubble shield. Whereas with the drop wall, as I say, you can now damage it and flank it and so on and so forth. And with armor locking, the only solution was really kind of just to wait for it to end. There was nothing else that any other player could do. You just had to wait for it to end. So these singular solutions create far more predictable, less varied, less engaging combat experiences, which I'd imagine is why they've been swapped out or omitted entirely. The next thing we're going to talk about is why change ADS. ADS referring to aim down sights. So anyone who's played Halo 5... Come here. Oh no. Oh, really? I promise I would normally get that. I promise. So why change ADS? So yeah, in Halo 5, whenever you aimed a gun, and by that I mean you pull the left trigger, which I'm doing right now, you would aim down the barrel of the gun, which you've probably seen in games like Call of Duty or Apex Legends. It's a very common staple of first-person shooter games nowadays, where you can aim down the sights of your gun, and that typically has gameplay implications in those games, and it also had gameplay implications in Halo 5, typically increasing what's called the red reticle range of the weapon, and also tightening the bullet spread. But we're going to circle back around to that in a second. So in Halo 5, 343 introduced an overhaul to the scope system called Smart Link, which was exactly that. Players could aim down the sights of literally every single weapon. Even the sword had an ADS view mode. And this change brought with it a change to the effectiveness and capability of each weapon. So for example, scoping with an auto weapon would tighten the bullet spread and accuracy, meaning weapons that were meant more for close range essentially became multi-use. The assault rifle in particular wasn't just useful for more kind of like close to mid-range fights. It could kind of go beyond that mid-range a little bit better. Whoops. He's fine. And it also increased, like I say, what was called, or what is referred to as the red reticle range. So the red reticle range refers to, you can see here that in the middle of our screen we've got our reticle. When you're aiming at an enemy, once you get within a certain distance of them, depending on the weapon, the reticle turns red. And this indicates the optimal kill range for a weapon, where you also receive the most aim assist. And this meant that the unique role of certain weapons was oftentimes lost, which we've talked about at the start of the episode, in terms of how the weapons in Halo are designed with these sort of high-level stats to ensure that they're balanced and never kind of like all-powerful, and have clear, identifiable purposes that players can kind of learn over time and feel smart about. So yeah, it also meant, this change in Halo 5 also meant that it changed the gameplay considerably. In Halo 5, you couldn't ADS after swapping weapons until the weapon had finished its settling in your hands animation. So when you switch a weapon, you can see this kind of, it's a little bit faster in Halo Infinite, but you can see if I switch the assault rifle, there's this little moment where the gun sort of just settles into your shoulder. So in Halo 5, like I say, you couldn't aim down sights after swapping weapons until the weapon had finished this little settling in your hands animation. Whereas in older Halo games, you could scope in slightly before that animation was complete. Now, that didn't mean that you could shoot quicker. The time to shoot after a weapon switch was the same, but being able to scope quicker just felt more responsive. And responsive is definitely a sort of buzzword that comes up quite often or in various sort of articles and whatever else about Halo Infinite's game feel. And it also, I would say, changed the perceived visual identity of the game, keyword being perceived. If you were to put kind of a screenshot of Halo 5 next to the likes of Destiny and COD and Apex, and then all of them, the players aiming down the sights, it almost becomes indistinguishable. It's kind of like, a sort of a hybrid of the others. And as humans, we're highly visual creatures, and we often judge things and create expectations of things based on their appearance. Hello, fast food marketing. So this is, I think, another big part of... this player is crouching constantly, but it's kind of effective. So yeah, fast forward to Halo Infinite, things are considerably different. So as we saw before, when I was aiming with the left trigger, you're no longer aiming down the barrel of the gun. You're no longer seeing that animation where the gun kind of like comes into the center of the screen a little bit. Instead, it's sort of like this almost binocular view. And that's not always the case for each weapon. Like each weapon has its own kind of view mode, as well as its own kind of functionality when you pull the left trigger. Some don't have that at all. Others actually change the way the gun fires, like the Heatwave, for example, which is a really interesting way of innovating, I think, in the first-person shooter space. But yeah, so very different. Weapons no longer kind of pull into the center of the screen when scoped. And when you're full scoping, and by that I mean with the sniper rifle, the battle rifle, if we can find one, then I can show you what I mean by full scoping. But full scoping is essentially when you have this sort of mask that comes over the screen, a la older Halo games, where you're kind of just aiming down this barrel of the gun, but it's more just based on UI rather than anything in game. And from what I've seen so far, reticle bloom is this, I think, by and large the same for weapons like the assault rifle, regardless of whether you're firing for the hip or scoping. So it feels like Halo Infinite wanted to offer players a more precise understanding of where their weapon is pointing and where they're shooting on a visual level, rather than necessarily have it impact the core gameplay and stick more to sort of a classic Halo feel. Let's do a Fiesta now, because we're going to find way more weapons and equipment that way. So speaking of game feel, before I go into game feel, we have to do the usual plug. So If this is your first time watching GDL, welcome. It's great to have you. If you're enjoying the episode, please do give the Twitch channel a follow and a like, or whatever they're called. You can also check out the Twitter channel, which I keep fairly up to date with the latest gaming-related news and articles. So if you're into that kind of thing, definitely check it out. And like I said before, you can also check out all the previous episodes of GDL on the GDL YouTube channel, all of which you can access from the Twitch channel's About section. So, that said and done, let's now have a little chat about game feel, or specifically Halo Infinite's game feel. Well, that was horrible, mostly for me. Yeah, so what does game feel even mean? Is a question I often get asked. Like, what is that term actually referring to in the games industry? What does game feel actually mean? And game feel, or juice, as it's often described or referred to in the games industry, relates to the sort of strange, abstract concept in... That was satisfying. That wasn't so satisfying. Yeah, that strange, abstract concept in video games that players can sense immediately from the moment they pick up the controller. And it mainly exists in the base second-to-second actions of the game, as well as in what those second-to-second actions actually are, like what the player can actually do. And I'm talking the most base things like running, walking, jumping, sliding, punching, all that stuff. A good way to think about it is, imagine for a moment Mario, but without the platforms. Just imagine Mario without any of the colors, without any of the enemies, any of the weapons, any of the power-ups, just Mario on his own in an infinite plane who can run and jump the way that Mario runs and jumps. So how it feels to control Mario in that imaginary white box space, that's your game feel. It's literally how fun it is to interact with the second-to-second commands you can give your in-game avatar. And it's also worth noting, just real quick, that this is just disastrous. I'm so sorry for playing this terribly. I'm saying that mostly to the team, but also to you, the viewer. So, yeah, it's also worth noting that more often than not, game feel is... Oh, that's a powerful sniper rifle. Game feel, more often than not, is very closely tied to a game's... Nice. To a game's target audience. So a 5-year-old might manage the soft, floaty feel of Mario just fine, but if you hand them a copy of something snappy and incredibly responsive like Celeste, the outcome is likely going to be very different in terms of their enjoyment. And while we're on the subject, a little anecdote for you, if you're into that kind of thing. It is said that for the first few, speaking of Mario, it's said that for the first few months, Shigeru Miyamoto fine-tuned every element of Mario's core moveset in Mario 64 before adding anything else to the game, which kind of underlines just how important an aspect of your game it is. This way. So yeah, what makes Halo Infinite's gameplay feel as good as everyone says it does? And as we just discussed, game feel is an incredibly abstract concept, and it varies vastly from game to game in terms of the different configurable buttons and levers and additions to the game that can help juice it up. Like all these different things that you're seeing here, the run speed, the walk speed, the distance that you slide, the height that you jump, acceleration when you're walking or running, how quickly the animations play out. All of this kind of stuff is typically designed in a way during the development of a game that is made to be as configurable as possible. So by that I mean that all these different numbers that relate to all these different stats are easy to change and tweak, and all these different things contribute to the feel of the game. Like changing something just as small as how quickly your shields recharge can have a massive impact on the overall experience of the game and the pace of the gameplay. And the way the numbers are right now creates the kind of experience that we're looking at the moment. Oh boy, that's not going to end well. Nope. Oh, come on. So for something like Halo, in terms of game feel, you're looking at a bunch of different things. The things we just mentioned, but also things like friction, your momentum, the sort of the sense of weight that different things have, again through animation and speed and even how quickly you clamber over something, all contribute to the sense of weight. Gun recoil, screen shake, visual feedback, shot kill, like how many shots it takes to kill opponents with certain weapons, responsiveness of your ADS. That was not too bad. Aim assist, headshot stickiness, sound effects. Sound effects in particular play a big part in game feel. The feel of a gun, or the power of a gun, and also they very much play into the feedback of the game. You'll notice whenever you kill an opponent in Halo Infinite, whether it's a headshot or a basic kill, there's a very distinct and very audible sort of crunching sound, which is not only very very satisfying, but essentially creates this sort of loop as part of the core game loop, where it's sort of the indication that yes, you have taken down the opponent. Oh no. So yeah, all these things and more are what create the game feel, and hopefully it gives you a sense of how games kind of go around defining that kind of thing and how it works. And what's also cool, as we touched on very briefly before in the episode, is how the maps in Halo Infinite have been designed in a way that they essentially facilitate your Spartan's core moveset. Like, they exist purely to let the player express their avatar's movement. There's different little opportunities for you to slide, or for you to sort of platform across different crates, or mantle up onto different ledges. Oh no. Never mind. Okay, now we're going to play seriously for just a second while we finish off this match, and then we're going to have a little chat about the meta. Damn it. One more kill for their side, and then we can chat about the meta a little bit. And we're probably going to start off talking about how it works, and then we're going to talk about the potential design rationale for why it is the way it is. That's painful. Ow. Not a good night for my win-loss ratio, but a good night for game design. Cool. So, I would like to point out as well, this is more of a miscellaneous thing, these arrows, so whenever you come to this screen, there's a couple of things actually here that we can talk about since we're here anyway, so why not before we get onto the meta. So, at the end of every match, you come to this results screen, this results page, where you're presented with 3 tabs to check it out. You've got your sort of core stats of how you performed throughout the match, and you can see there's a little chevron in the deaths column above the number 11, which is shameful, and it's pointing down the way. I have still to really understand exactly what these chevrons are pointing out. I assume that it means I died the most, but you would kind of expect that chevron to be pointing up. I'm not quite sure. I have seen that chevron appear pointing upwards above my kill number whenever I come top on the leaderboard, and I assumed that meant I'd scored the most kills in the team, and it was a quick way of communicating that. It doesn't quite translate. I'm still not, and the fact I'm not entirely sure is kind of, call out enough that it's a bit of a weird bit of UX/UI to have. And what's also a bit of a shame, I would like to see the game add in the future, is this is an awesome tab, it's an awesome screen, the team lineup where you get to see all the different players that were in your fire team for that match. You can see their names here, but there's no way of correlating name to avatar. I mean, apart from my own, of course, I have no idea which of these Spartans Just Bros is, or RPB0, I think their name is, or these are some great names. But yeah, it'd be nice to have like some sort of like white silhouette around the Spartan that I'm currently looking at, or even just a little white arrow to indicate who each of these players are. And also, just to know that my Spartan is connected to my name, so that when other players are checking out this kind of screen, they know who they're looking at, which I think would tie in quite nicely with the greater emphasis on Spartan customization that Halo Infinite offers, which we're just about to look at. In fact, let's just look at it right now. So let's go back into the screen and have a look a bit more at the Battle Pass. So we've got these 3 different things here. Let's just check out the core Battle Pass. So in terms of Battle Passes, it's pretty straightforward and pretty much what you'd expect to see. So you've got a list of different rewards, some of which are free, others you can only collect if you've bought the Premium Battle Pass. So again, pretty par for the course. The way you progress to the Battle Pass is by completing challenges. So over here on the far right, you see here, you've got your daily challenge, which just keeps cycling. So whenever you complete it, it's replaced with another, so you can keep earning XP just by playing. Keyword playing rather than winning, which we're going to touch on in a minute. And then you've got your weekly challenges. So each of these you can see here are slightly different colors. It took me a little while to realize that the color indicates the rarity / amount of XP they offer. So the more blue they are, the more valuable they are. And each of them offer a certain amount of XP that goes toward the Battle Pass when it's earned. You'll also see here on the far left that these are sort of little buttons here with the loopy arrows. This indicates the ability to swap out a weekly challenge for another weekly challenge that is in the pool of weekly challenges that have been given out for that week. So you can see there in the bottom left of the screen, it says upcoming challenges, and if I press Y, we see those. So this is the overall, this is the other weekly challenges that I'm not currently trying to complete. These are ones that are still in the bank, and when I finish a weekly challenge, one of these will replace whatever one I finish. So you're limited. But if you're struggling with a certain challenge, you can use, I think it's called a challenge swap, to swap out a challenge for one of those ones in the pool. And it's random. You don't get to pick which one you get out of the pool. It's drawn at random. So that's the way the Battle Pass works. And if you complete all your weekly challenges, you're in this ultimate prize here on the, or rather, I think you get one more challenge, the ultimate challenge. And then if you finish that, which is quite a lot, then you get this ultimate exclusive prize. And it's interesting that there's no other way to earn this. I think once this has been and gone, it's been and gone. So there's a very strong use of FOMO there to almost like demand engagement with the game. So that's how the system currently works. And I can definitely appreciate the pros of this kind of system. First and foremost, it's quick and easy, relatively speaking, to use. I mean, we looked here, for example, at the upcoming challenges / active challenges. It took me a while to realize that upcoming challenges was even a thing that existed. I'm talking about this screen here. It would be nice to have some sort of indication on this level that there are more challenges waiting to be done, even if it was like a scrolling window list or something, or upcoming challenges was more clearly communicated. It's quite buried and hidden for something so important, because it relates to the progression that players can achieve through the Battle Pass, which is really the only progression the game offers, or is the only progression the game offers. But yeah, it's quick and easy in the sense that there's no effort on the player really whatsoever. There's no decision making required. Players don't have to decide what they want to do or whatever else. It's all kind of taken care of for them. All they have to do is play, essentially, and make decisions in the core gameplay. It's also relatively approachable. Like anyone, by and large, can do these things. Like they're less reliant, I'd say, on skill and more just sort of engaging with the game. That's not always the case. There are definitely some challenges that are particularly nuanced and can be quite challenging, which in turn I assume is to encourage the use / purchasing, as you can purchase these challenge swap items with premium currency to push the importance and use of these challenge swaps. Challenge swaps are also really interesting to chat about real quick as a bit of a tangent. Like we said, challenge swaps only swap out a weekly challenge for another weekly challenge that's sitting in the pool. So it's not like you're getting rid of something to do something else. The thing you swapped out will come back eventually. When eventually you finish whatever other weekly challenges you're doing, the one you swapped out will come back around. It doesn't just annihilate it or swap it out entirely, which feels a bit strange. And like I say, I think another part of the system is exactly that. It's the upselling of the challenge swaps. The core problem, and it's a problem that I think has been well cited on the internet by other people that are talking about it, but we're going to talk about it here anyway. The core problem with a system like this in its current state is that it forces players to play the game in a way that at its best is kind of annoying. It's no fun being forced to use a weapon that you don't click with or just don't want to use, but kind of have to in order to progress further. And at its worst is essentially detrimental to the core gameplay and core experience, because suddenly players don't care about doing what's best for their team or the match, but instead may likely make decisions that help them progress rather than have fun. And other games with similar progression setups, such as Dauntless or Destiny, they get around this in quite clever ways by offering the player the ability to choose their own challenges, which are it's just as easy to monetize and offers players far more agency over how they progress and engage with the progression side of the game. So in Dauntless, for example, whenever you're picking, I think they're called bounties, you generate a collection of bounties, I think it's 3, and then you pick from one of those 3 which one you want to add to your to-do list. So there's a little bit of luck, but also still a fair degree of agency, and they also come in different rarities as well. So we're now at 10:02, we've got 10 minutes left. We're going to kick off another game, and we're going to talk about some bits and pieces in the time we have left. I hope you enjoyed the episode so far, and the various areas we've kind of dived deep into. Let's just kick off another Fiesta game mode. So yeah, I think that's kind of the biggest part of why the challenge system as is quite impactful and perhaps somewhat detrimental to the core experience because of the prescriptiveness that it places on the game. Are we going to find a match? Come on, we've only got so much time. I think we've got time for one more. So yeah, let's talk about some bits and pieces. So some other things that I've kind of noticed that I've kind of missed a little bit, especially from other shooters. For anyone who watches the channel often, you'll know that I'm a big fan of shooters, so that's where this comes from. And something I've missed are the Destiny 2 style relationships between players during gameplay. So for anyone familiar with the game, if you're not, totally fine, we're going to talk about it anyway. During a match in Destiny 2, Crucible or whatever else, there are certain times where you'll see in the event feed different things like you avenged a player, you defended a player, you whatever a player. Like, there are different kind of mini relationships that can form between players throughout a match depending on the context of what happened in the game. And it's cool because it creates slightly sort of stronger, clearer relationships, not only between you and your enemies, but more importantly between you and your allies. And you also get kind of rewarded for it with these sort of points that come on the screen and little medals that come on the screen, which all feels really satisfying and good to know that you're doing these things without even thinking. You know, you're playing well or doing this cool stuff. Even if you got killed like straight after doing it, knowing that you avenged someone still feels pretty good. It's also interesting that Halo has taken, I think, some bits from Destiny. I don't know if Halo did it before. I don't think it did. It might have done, and maybe Destiny took it from Halo. But when you're aiming certain weaponry, specifically scoped weaponry, this is taking a while, isn't it? I have had this experience a couple of times where it just sort of hangs on other players loading for a while. I apologize. I'm not sure why it's taking this long to load. Hopefully it'll jump us into a game soon. But yeah, so what it does is that whenever you're aiming down the sights of a weapon, normally quite high-powered weapons, especially, for example, the sniper rifle, it creates a glint from that player. So if you're on the opposite side of the map and a player is aiming at you with a sniper rifle, you'll see this sort of white or red glint in the distance, which makes it super clear and obvious that you're being aimed at by a sniper, which feels quite fair in the sense that you're not going to be sniped by some random player like way off in the distance you couldn't possibly have seen and responded to. So that's quite an interesting thing that they seem to have included in this version of Halo in Halo Infinite. It's also slightly frustrating that there's no way of knowing, and if there is a way of knowing, please do tell me, there's no way of knowing others' battle pass progression. So there's no way of knowing, even just to create a sort of sense of friendly competition between, you know, mates that you're playing with, how far along they are. The only way to really kind of get a sense of that is through looking at their Spartan, like checking out what armor they're wearing and whatnot. which is fine, but I'd imagine it will only go so far. You know, as the game evolves and we add more pieces of armor, it's going to become progressively more and more difficult to get a sense of where they are in the current battle pass because of the depth of the customization pool that the game offers. So having some sort of like way of finding that out would be very cool, I think. Not bad. Triple kill. Not bad. So yeah, this is the heat wave. We talked about this before. So as you can see here, the reticle is this sort of horizontal line. If I pull the left trigger, it changes it to a vertical column, which changes the way the gun fires. So it has sort of like multiple purposes, or is multifaceted. This is also the repulsor, which I finally got. That was actually really cool that it just like sent everything in the room flying. But this is the repulsor, just to show you what it is and how it works, since we talked about it before. Oh, I thought I was going to get a bunch of them there. Yeah, the other thing that would have been really nice to have is some way of knowing if and when you complete challenges during a game. So like we mentioned, certain challenges are things like, you know, get X kills with weapon whatever. And because there's no communication of if and when you complete a challenge while you're playing a game, you can potentially just end up using that weapon far longer than you actually have to, because the game doesn't tell you when you've finished the thing you're meant to be doing. Oh boy. He's going to come back, isn't he? No, he's not. Okay. Okay. And as we talked about before, let's touch on this before I forget, is the cosmetic side of the game. So there's, in terms of progression, the only way to progress in Halo is through a battle pass, which offers, by and large, cosmetics. There's no power progression really of any sort. It's purely cosmetic and nothing else. And a lot of the sort of online chatter around this is the frustration that there's just not enough there to keep players satisfied. There's not enough customization options. It's slow or a bit of a grind to work your way through the battle pass and earn those things in the first place, which is, from a developer standpoint, something I completely understand. Like the game released early, so it might be they didn't have enough time to generate the kind of volume of assets they were looking for. So instead, they used numbers to sort of drag out the content a little bit further because there's only so much to include. But I find it interesting that they didn't go for certain customization options that I think would have really helped with that, which is namely the use of color. So one of the things you can unlock in Halo Infinite's Battle Pass are shaders. And it's these sort of like color combos that can be applied to your Spartan all up. So you just apply this one shader and it completely changes the color scheme of your Spartan. You're unable to change individual pieces of armor's color with these shaders. It's just an all-up change. And this I find really interesting, and I'm curious to know why 343 didn't allow for or consider offering players different colors for different pieces of equipment or armor, which would have really added a lot of depth to the amount of stuff they could have offered on the Battle Pass, and not just colors, but also, you know, holographic colors, patterns, decals. But more importantly, you know, again, from a developer standpoint, these things are relatively cheap to generate and make en masse, as opposed to entirely new 3D models and new pieces of armor and things that completely change the aesthetic of your Spartan. And color is such a big part of personalization as well. You look at the game, you look at Destiny 2, for example, shaders are a massive part of how players generate a closer bond with their Guardians and really express themselves. I could understand not doing that if the color of the Spartan armor that you're wearing was a big part of sort of your team colors, you know, the sort of old red versus blue style. But in Halo Infinite, you're allowed to wear really kind of whatever colors you want, because as you can see here, your teammates are given this sort of blue overlay and your opponents are given a red one. So it's very easy to tell who your enemies are versus your friends are, and also allows you to customize your Spartan Oh, damn. Customize your Spartan freely without impacting the readability of who's in your team versus who's not in your team. So in terms of customization, I can't see a rationale for why allowing players to just all up color their Spartan the way they want to color them to be a thing. Damn. Rocket launcher off. Kind of lucky to get 2 rocket launchers in a row. Ah, damn it. Oh, that was a terrible shot. Lots of terrible shots. So yeah, that essentially concludes our episode on Halo Infinite, folks. I really hope you enjoyed it, whether you're watching the VOD. Ow! Or if you just enjoy watching me get like annihilated, that's also totally fine. But whether you're watching it as a VOD, or you've watched it live, or you're watching it on YouTube, I really hope you enjoyed the episode. As I said before, if you have, do please give the channels a like and a follow. It's massively appreciated. The channel is still fairly new. But if people are enjoying, then great. Two sword users, what were the chances? Let's go. I like as well how I don't think previous Halo games did this, but I could very well be wrong, I'm not entirely certain, but this sort of Left 4 Dead ability to see your teammates through any wall and any surface is really cool. And also knowing if and when they're in trouble. You can see this player here has a little exclamation mark above their head, so I know they're quite low on health. It's easy for me to identify if and when a teammate needs help. Oh no. Damn, I had a hammer the whole time as well. Okay, well, fortunately my suffering is going to be short-lived because they've got 4 more kills to go until they win this. 3 more now. See here the mantling that we talked about before, the speed of the mantling, tapping again into the game feel. Things like even the animation of this weapon, so you know, I'm running with this weapon, you can see this animation of the gun bobbing, which is very different from the other guns in the game, which again creates that sense of how weighty this gun feels in particular versus others. So that feels like a pretty good time to wrap it up with everyone saluting like that. I love it. So yeah, if you've enjoyed the episode, again, please give the channel a follow. I very much enjoyed having this episode with you. If you're not playing Halo, I definitely recommend it. You give it a try and check it out. Until next time, have a great night, take care of yourselves, and I will see you again soon for the next episode.